All right, hello, my name is Christine Coxon. I'm in Professor Ava Vasalis' 2328 American Literature class, and today I'm going to talk to you about lynching and how it could be the voice of justice. All right, Ida B. Wells in her article, Lynch Law in America, makes the following statement about our country. Our country's national crime is lynching, she says. It is not the creature of an hour, the sudden outburst of uncontrolled fury, or the unspeakable brutality of an insane mob. It represents the cool, calculating deliberation of intelligent people who openly avow that there is an unwritten law that justifies them in putting human beings to death without complying under oath, without trial by jury, without opportunity to make defense, and without right of appeal. In this article, she's addressing the lynching of African Americans. During the 1920s, it was common for African Americans to be lynched, and she was addressing that issue. For the sake of this paper, I'm addressing the lynch law as a society's problem. Lynch law is when society takes a group of people who step outside the natural boundaries of society, and society persecutes them for that, whether it be physical or socially. Lynch law cannot be pinpointed. It's something that changes with society. As society changes, different groups end up standing out from society, and the lynch law applies to them after that. So today I'm going to address how lynch law can find its way into the jury box and therefore affect our government and our interpretations of justice. The United States law says, in a very real sense, therefore, the people must rely upon jurors for the protection of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In America, we have a unique government. We rely on the people, or the jury, for the interpretation of justice. But people are human, and people are part of society. So they are at risk of bringing this lynch law, or this, I guess it's also called scapegoat theory, into society. The authors, Harper Lee, John Grisham, and Ida B. Wells in their literature showed how American society's lynch law toward African Americans entangles itself with the pursuit of justice in the courtroom, causing chaos and destruction to follow. I'm going to begin with Harper Lee. Harper Lee, in her book To Kill a Mockingbird, tells the story of a trial lawyer during the Great Depression, 1930s, named Atticus Finch. Atticus Finch takes on the case of Tom Robinson, a man who is accused of raping a young girl. It turns out that this man was actually innocent, and Atticus was able to prove that this Tom was innocent and did not rape the girl, and in fact the girl was actually in love with Tom. But despite his discovery, Tom was still sentenced to go to prison. But on his way to prison, he was shot by an unknown cause. They don't know who shot the bullet, and they don't know how he died. It was unknown. He just vanished. Oh gosh, it's so
Yeah, it's been haywire, don't worry about it.
Okay, well that's it. Okay. Sorry, just pretend that didn't happen. So Harper Lee was the daughter of a trial lawyer in Alabama, as well as a student of the law herself. To Kill a Mockingbird was written in the 1960s, 100 years after the Civil War. And in her society in the 1960s, segregation was very common. In schools, African American children could not sit with white children. There was separation, 2 separate cafeterias. There was even bathrooms for colored and white. So American society embraced segregation. That was totally normal and acceptable. Also, lynchings were still common. There was over 5,000 lynchings between 1989 and 1960. For example, Lamar Smith, an innocent World War II veteran, showed above, was shot in the street to death, and there was 30 witnesses that this man shot Lamar Smith. But there was no charges made, and nothing was done about it. It was common. There was no even police records about it. It was totally normal for people to be lynched. In fact, some African Americans weren't even considered human by some people, another class of society. This excerpt is written by Charles LeVay of the Chicago Tribune, wrote the following description of an African male named Robert Nixon who was accused for rape. It says, "The Negro youth is Robert Nixon. He is 18 years old and comes from a pretty little town in the South, Tulsa, Louisiana. But there is nothing pretty about Robert Nixon. He has none of the charm of speech or manner that is characteristic of so many Southern darkies. That charm is a mark of civilization, and so far as manner and appearance go, civilization has left Nixon practically untouched. His hunched shoulders and long, sinewy arms that dangle almost to his knees, his outthrust head and cat-like tread all suggest the animal. He is very black, almost pure Negro. His physical characteristics suggest an earlier link in the species. Here you see Charles writing this and almost considering Nixon not even human. Another link in the species, really? This is how society viewed African Americans. So it is no wonder in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird that, oh, is it not working again?
You may not want to hold it in your hand, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just don't worry about it.
Okay, well, you get what I'm saying. I'm sorry. So it's no surprise that in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird that Tom Robinson was accused, because this society embraced African Americans as inhuman, not part of actual society. There was segregation, and so it's no surprise that he was accused. Right.
Oh,
You
it's
already
not
did.
you, it's the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, I might just
Is it maybe
refer.
a timer or something?
No, I mean, I think it was doing it with his too.
Was it doing with yours too? 'Cause
Someone's PowerPoint.
you know,
was
I'm just
doing
gonna
that
go to clicking up here, so you might have to bear with me as I walk.
Someone's looking.
Oh, okay. All right. John Grisham, in his book A Time to Kill, addresses the concept of how justice in the American court system can be impacted by the racial views and prejudice in culture. Grisham tells the story of a man named Carl Lee Haley who is accused of killing two men, Cobb and Willard, who raped his daughter. The day of their court trial, Carl and Willard walked into the courtroom and Carl Lee shot them. Usually, this would be called a justified murder in the court cases, and Carl Lee would be allowed to actually serve a short time in prison and not face the death penalty. But in this case, a racial battle spews out over whether Carl Lee is truly innocent or not. He is faced with the death sentence, actually. Carl Lee hires a young lawyer named Jake to attend to his case. Jake has to fight and battle to allow Carl Lee to actually live. This town has an active KKK, and the K ends up attacking Jake's family and Carl Lee's family. The town seeks for Carl Lee to die, and by a short margin, actually, Carl Lee ends up going home. Okay. Grisham was talking about how Grisham shares some ideas on racism. He says, I think we are all racist, just at different levels. We prefer our race and are quick to condemn others. We are quick to look at life through colored glasses. Racism is a result of culture, and it depends on who's in your jury that defines whether you're going to be innocent or not in the government. Because we do trial by jury, and people make up the jury, they are at risk of bringing this lynch law in. We saw that in Carl Lee's case in the book. In the book, he wanted, the city did not want him to be innocent. The city was against him. The KKK was against him because that was their lynch law of the city. They brought that into the government system. They weren't seeking true justice, but they were seeking their own prejudices, if that makes sense. The United States Constitution says that all men are equal all men are created equal, and they are equal under the law. That is not true. In the American court system, the person on trial is at the mercy of the prejudices and the racial and whatever views that the jury has. They are under the lynch law that the jury brings into the jury box. And so that ultimately affects justice in the court system. This theory that I'm calling lynch law is also called scapegoat theory. And philosopher Rene Girard, this is from his book. According to Girard, scapegoating is ritualized violence that, when done unanimously, effectively stops violence and establishes social harmony. If scapegoating is done unanimously with the consent of the entire community, the linchpin of his theorizing, it suppresses the possibility of I can't talk today. Unanimity is a formal requirement. The abstention of a single participation renders the sacrifice even worse than useless. It makes it dangerous. What he's saying in a kind of confusing way is that we need this scapegoat theory. We need this lynch law in order for government to work. Because if you made it illegal, like I said, it's not really pinpointed, it moves. So if you take this away from people, it wouldn't be society, basically. That part of society is this scapegoating theory. So if you were to make lynch law illegal in America, potentially you wouldn't have government at all. And but there's a fine line. lynch law exists today, but it's not overtaking in a mob mentality, but it's not illegal. It's kind of just there. It's allowed to exist because it is necessary for civilization. And, 1 minute. We see this, and Ida B. Wells shows in her book, Mob Rule in New Orleans, what happens when lynch law is taken in a mob mentality. Ida B. Wells, in her article, Mob Rule in New Orleans, tells the story of Charles and Pierce, two black men who are innocently sitting on the step. They are sitting there for no reason, just hanging out, I guess, and then two policemen come up and question them, saying, "Why are you sitting here?" And they just said, "Well, I don't know, because we can sit here, no problem." But the two police officers start beating the men. They beat them, abuse them, pretty bad. So one of the boys, Charles, pulls out a gun and shoots one of the officers. At that point, the officers, Charles runs, and there's a manhunt throughout New Orleans for Charles. While they're searching for Charles, there's a mob that just comes in swarms looking for him, bloodthirsty, and wanting to persecute any African Americans in their way, whether innocent or not. There could be an old lady on the street, and they just kill her just because she was black, and because they were looking for Charles. Even after Charles is taken to prison and killed, the mob is just so bloodthirsty and so angry that one of their officers was shot by an African American man that they ended up going on another killing spree and just killing innocent people. That was their form of justice. The mob was taking justice into their hands, and what they saw it as right. And so we see this. Ida B. Wells was showing what happens when lynch law becomes a mob, when it has no boundaries, basically, and how it overtakes the society. During her time, around 1910, 1920s, when she came up with this theory and wrote Mob Rule in New Orleans, lynching was still common, like I said, and mob mentality did exist. The following pictures are from Jesse Washington's lynch in 1920. He was lynched in Waco, Texas. There was actually a mob there. The city of Waco declared a city holiday, and so all schools were let out to watch this lynching. There was about 10,000 people there. It was open. They've hired a professional photographer to photograph this horrible ordeal, and they actually put it on their postcard. And it was their postcard for 10 years, was a lynching of Jesse Washington. And so this was the society that Ida B. Wells lived in. She was witnessing firsthand what happens when a mob feels like they can have justice in their hands. When they take lynch law to that next step, they justify their actions by that lynch law. Okay. So today, we don't really see people getting lynched. We don't have segregation. We believe that we've done a good job of trying to make sure every race and culture has an equal chance at getting educations and stuff like that. We've done a great job of that. But today, it's not just racism that has a problem. Lynch law has moved to other issues. For example, like homosexuality. Back in the 1930s to 1960s, homosexuals were scared to come out of the closet. They were considered kind of the perverts of society. They couldn't get jobs. They had trouble participating in society. Nowadays, it's the opposite. Homosexuals are allowed to practice openly in most cultures. They are allowed in some states to marry. They have their own TV shows, talk shows. They're in our news, in our literature. And if anyone opposes homosexuality, they're considered a hate group and labeled as intolerant. So you can see how lynch law moved from racism now to kind of people that are anti-gay. Also, you can see lynch law moving from creation to evolution. In the classroom, a student could have a creationist viewpoint, and in a classroom that supports evolution, and they will get persecuted, possibly in their grade and socially in a school. So you can see lynch law moved from racism to now education system. So today I'm going to ask you, where do you find your justice? We're all members of society. We all interact in different social circles every day. So my question for you is, what is your lynch law? Where do you find your justice? What is our lynch law for society? What do you think is just, and what do you think is right? Do you think lynch law is correct? The lynch law that society has now is correct? Are you willing to stand up for what is right and what is just? All right, that's it. questions or anything?
All right, so what would you think is I mean, you said you identified some areas where the lynch law is applying nowadays, but what do you think are some actions that people take? Like, what are some different approaches? Because do you think there's different approaches on like how lynch law is enforced now than back then?
Well, yeah, I don't think people are getting killed. I mean, but I think it's more of a social lynching now. I mean, it could very well lead to physical, but I think it's a very social, like I said, in the classroom. Like, for example, if I was here actually taking a class and I had a creationist viewpoint, and I expressed that in class, my teacher could potentially fail me. I mean, I know that's not right, but in their eyes, they could be failing me or giving me a 4th grade justified. So it's more like a social lynching now. I would say nowadays, not necessarily now.
Would you consider school bullying a form of lynching?
Oh, definitely.
Facebook and kids that have to eat in the bathroom because they don't want to go to the cafeteria. I've heard of that kind of thing, and when I was hearing you talk, it kind of like the two were connected.
Mm-hmm. I'd say yes, definitely. That's definitely it. I also think it's at a bigger scale than just bullying. I think it's a national scale. And I truly think it's part of society. Society naturally has a lynch law. It wouldn't be society if there was no lynch law. So I believe that that is part of a school society. I mean, you're in that environment, and I think that definitely is. Nationally, I think there also is, like, politically and stuff like that.
Do you feel that society should express more tolerance to these people, or do you think that everyone should remain like isolated to their own viewpoint?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think no matter what you do, no matter what steps you take, this will always exist at some level or another. I think, like I said, it's just part of society. I wish I could make it better. I wish that there could be a way to end it. But I think even if we become tolerant, but we still become intolerant to other things. We can't help it. We're human. I know me, I can say I'm tolerant of something, but in my heart of hearts, I'm like intolerant to it, if that makes sense. I mean, you have your natural tastes, and just like you individually have natural tastes and preferences, society has natural tastes and preferences. They may change from decade to decade, century to century, but they still do. So any other questions?
I have one question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but the last question you ended with, it was a powerful question. What is your justice?
My
That
justice.
was a huge question. I just would like to have your viewpoint on that.
So what now, Christy?
Wait to see off.
You have 5 minutes.
Time over yet?
You brought it home, I'm telling you, but I'd like to hear that.
Okay, well, I'm a Christian, and I believe that Jesus Christ is my personal Lord and Savior. I believe that is the only way to get to heaven. So I am kind of intolerant of other things. So as a Christian, I believe that the Bible is the only true form of justice, because I believe that is truth. And in my opinion, that is the only truth, and that is the truth to live by, and I think that is truth to me. So. Any other questions? I'm sorry about the that was so weird.
That was weird.
It's,
It was-
It's like there's a ghost, Christy.